Have you ever watched someone neglect all the important things in their life? Have you watched someone harm their closest relationships, neglect their duties at work, and even forget to eat for long stretches? It's a common behavior of someone who has an addiction. They pursue the source of their intense impulse to the detriment of everything else. It's hard to watch and even harder to experience yourself. Addiction can quickly turn a person's life upside down, but it can also insidiously eat away at someone largely unnoticed. You may end up in the hospital with an overdose or just far less savings for your retirement. For some, their addiction is a manageable staple of their morning routine. They can't do without their coffee and their daily intake of the drug caffeine. Coffee, however, doesn't negatively impact your health or social life. Caffeine is a very normalized addiction. We usually only refer to it as a drug when we joke about our intense cravings for it. But other forms of addiction are normalized and do cause harm. You may be watching this video on a very normal, addictive device. Generation Z is currently struggling with an addiction epidemic, and I'm not referring to their coffee consumption. If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction, please understand that therapy is an integral part of the recovery process. Talking to the right therapist can help you learn healthy ways of coping with the thoughts, feelings, and stressors that trigger you. It can also help you better understand why you got addicted in the first place, which will prevent you from relapsing after getting the help you need. If you don't know where to start with therapy, then I highly recommend you check out the sponsor of today's episode, BetterHelp. Although I haven't personally had to deal with any addiction, there was a time when I really struggled with imposter syndrome. Spending time with a therapist allowed me to process this feeling and also taught me how to overcome it. Today I'm in a much better place mentally, and I no longer feel like a fraud. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy accessible to everyone. All you have to do is answer a few questions, and usually in as little as a few days, you'll get assigned a professional therapist. If you don't like the therapist you were assigned for whatever reason, BetterHelp makes it super easy to switch to a new one completely for free, so you can make sure you have the best connection possible with your therapist. It's super important to feel comfortable with your therapist, and you can make sure you're extra comfortable by having your sessions through phone call, video chat, or messaging, whatever feels best for you. With BetterHelp, getting started with therapy is now super easy. Just click the link in the description down below and go to betterhelp.com/Aperture, or choose Aperture to get 10% off your first month and connect with the right therapist for you. Back to our story. But before anyone gets defensive or judgmental, I want to make clear that the point of the video isn't to blame, but to add context, while also sharing possible pathways to a healthier future. Gen Z is more likely to struggle with substance abuse than other generations. Even though they are less likely to drink alcohol, Gen Z is more likely to engage with cannabis, hallucinogenic drugs, vaping, prescription benzo misuse, and a range of addictive activities. This isn't surprising, as marijuana has been legalized in many places across North America, and hallucinogenic mushrooms have become more widely available. Benzos, which you might know in their commercial form as Xanax or Valium, have also become much easier to access in recent years. The prohibited use of marijuana was an overbearing policy, given that the drug is less harmful to our health than alcohol. But that doesn't mean its legalization hasn't come with consequences. The drug is more normalized now and widespread, which seems to have influenced how Gen Z members use it regularly. Fortunately, in states where marijuana is legal, adolescent cannabis use has gone down. Fewer teens are using it, but those that are use it more. Alcohol and e-cigarette use has also decreased in these same states. Nicotine vape pens were also introduced in the last 20 years and have been heavily adopted by Gen Z. Vapes are increasingly associated with health issues and can ironically lead to cigarette addiction. The nicotine in vapes can harm parts of the developing adolescent brain associated with learning, mood, attention, and impulse control. Vapes also contain chemicals that are known to cause cancer. We still don't know a lot about the overall long-term health impacts, unlike cigarettes, but the early signs aren't great. Gen Z is exposed to a lot of vape content on social media from influencers and random posts, and those who have seen the content are more likely to vape themselves, unfortunately. People have been using pot for a long time now, and we know that it can impact the developing young brain in negative ways. It can cause poorer cognitive performance and a worsened ability to learn and recall information. With e-commerce widely available on smartphones, Gen Z has developed an addiction to online purchases. Zoomers are compulsively shopping for things they can't afford, impulse buying what they think they need in order to create a short-term improvement in their mood. It's often a way of coping with stress, anxiety, and depression, or just a way to escape from negative emotions into positive ones. They're essentially buying brief moments of happiness. The pervasiveness of online marketing doesn't help the situation. Marketing systems are designed to ensnare consumers in a funnel, leading them to make a purchase. While this isn't a deterministic process, it's proven to be more impactful on shoppers with an addiction. When you look at a product on a website, you'll often be targeted with an ad later showcasing the same product, probably with a discount. Or the same company will send you an email showing you items to go with your new purchase. For shopping addicts, it's all one big web, with the spider consuming you whole at the end of the funnel. Businesses are always trying to seduce you into spending more, and when you're always online, you're easy to find. As more younger people access online shopping, they're more susceptible to being trapped in a shopping addiction. A little blast of temporary happiness is at their fingertips. They just have to press buy now and their credit card information and address are auto-filled. It's just so effortless, you can make a purchase from the ads themselves sometimes. You no longer have to interrupt your social feed. If you want to reduce the hold that marketing practices have on you, there's plenty of ways to avoid most of the targeted ads. You can use web browsers that give you the option of disabling third-party tracking cookies like Firefox or Chrome. Some people are more likely than others to struggle with addiction for a variety of reasons. It can be a maladaptive way of coping with a traumatic event from childhood. Prolonged stress at an early age can impair emotional regulation and cognitive development in lasting ways. It can cause us to over-respond to minimal threats and everyday difficulties. This kind of conditioning is known to lead to substance abuse. It's a way to cope with how overwhelming everyday life can be after a traumatic childhood. Neglectful or authoritarian parenting can contribute to a person being more susceptible to addiction. The same is true for growing up in a violent household. These are also conditions of prolonged stress for a child. There's also genetic factors. Some people metabolize alcohol in a way that makes it undesirable, for example. They're less likely to become addicted than people who find the experience more enjoyable. People have different alcohol metabolizing enzymes, varying from person to person. Chronic stress and anxiety in adults can also lead to varying forms of addiction. Taking a substance as a stress relief can enhance the pleasure of the experience. Many of us have experienced this when drinking after a long, hard day at work or a difficult exam period. The euphoria is more intense. If we're looking for primary causes for addiction that are shared by an entire generation, it's probably anxiety and stress. These are symptoms that can rise globally based on the state of the world. Gen Z and younger millennials are currently experiencing stress and anxiety more than previous generations, and there are numerous common factors. The cause of stress in Gen Z has been given the worst financial circumstances in modern history. Their school debt is high, the cost of groceries grow daily, the interest rate in the US is only now starting to fall, and obtaining a mortgage is increasingly out of reach for the vast majority of Zoomers. For those trying to rent, it typically costs more per month than a mortgage would. Life is more expensive, and long-standing financial goals are drifting further out of reach. Gen X and the baby boomers heavily rely on the value of their homes as a gateway to retirement. Most of them could buy into the housing market cheaply and reap the benefits of the rising value of their homes. This form of investment won't be an option for Gen Z, and largely wasn't for millennials. We've essentially eroded financial security for an entire generation and likely more to come. Our finances are intertwined with our basic needs, and when these needs are at risk of not being met, anxiety grows. It's a survival mechanism after all. In addition to life being more expensive, salaries haven't gone up much in real terms. To live a comfortable existence, Gen Z has to earn considerably more than other generations at their age. Gen Z will struggle to save for retirement. They will likely have to work much later than previous generations for the privilege of not working. But will retirement even be a relevant concept by the time Gen Z has saved enough? A Zoomer retirement assumes that the world still functions like it does now. Global threats loom around every corner as we go deeper into the 21st century. Will 2050 accommodate what we consider a comfortable retirement today? For a long time, these global issues seemed abstract. We could either ignore them or keep them safely in the back of our minds. However, the global pandemic in 2020 showed the world that our lives can be severely disrupted. It gave us a strong taste of what a worldwide crisis looks and feels like. We're now very capable of imagining the horrors that could await us if the climate crisis continues unabated. Gen Z members on TikTok can also clearly see what nightmares war brings as they view clips from Gaza. For most of us, war isn't at our doorstep, but we can all clearly see the relationship between superpowers becoming more fraught. They almost exclusively fight by proxy, but will that last? We also don't want to see the current victims of war suffer as we remain helpless from far away. When you combine the friction between nations and the fallout of the climate crisis, it's not hard to imagine a more brutal future, often depicted in post-apocalyptic stories. It's easy to forget that some of these nations are nuclear superpowers, and one nuclear strike could lead to total Armageddon. Life on Earth would cease or at least be completely miserable for the few remaining inhabitants. This was a fear that permeated the Cold War that is currently a mere background concern, while tensions between the US, Russia, and China continue to simmer menacingly. But if we do manage to avoid these global catastrophes, Gen Z will be able to find satisfaction in their work. That is, unless AI takes away the majority of meaningful careers. For a couple years, we've all been familiar with AI's ability to produce writing and graphics. ChatGPT can write your blog post, and Midjourney can design your thumbnail images. You can question the quality of its output, but it doesn't need to be that good. AI has been successfully marketed as a way to produce more for less. It can reduce a business's need for labor while increasing its output. AI gurus will talk of new kinds of jobs that will replace the old, but it's more likely that AI prompting will become part of existing high-level roles. You're already seeing the disappearance of some entry-level writing jobs, making it harder for some members of Gen Z to enter the workforce. And what types of jobs will be AI-proof? It's hard to say. Hardly anyone expected creative work to be the first target of AI, but here we are. Again, Gen Z is left with the uncertainty over the future and their ability to secure basic needs. It's a stressful circumstance to exist in, and all the meditation apps in the world won't really prevent these problems from creeping in. More is that Zoomers can't escape the constant reminder of these global issues. There's a horrible little device in their pocket that keeps the horrors of the world flowing in a steady stream. It has them scrolling until the early hours of the morning in a constant state of panic and despair. Smart mobile devices exploded in popularity just as the early members of Gen Z became teenagers. They're not only a vehicle for the mental health stressors that can lead to addiction, but are an addiction in themselves. They're the complete addiction package. While mobile games and websites are compelling, the introduction of social media apps made our phones truly addictive. Gen Z is on numerous social media platforms, hearing about every social ill in clips and posts. They're also seeing their connections online post glamorous vacation pics, or writing incendiary hot takes that they passionately agree or disagree with. They keep coming back for more of their social feed because they're addicted to the dopamine hits it gives them. All the notifications, messages, and updates trigger this reaction. They are so hooked that it feels unnatural and painful to not receive dopamine hits from the smartphone at a constant rate. Zoomers feel uncomfortable going longer than a few minutes without looking. Even when in the company of others, Gen Z engages in a phenomenon known as phubbing, a portmanteau combining the words phone and snubbing. The concept describes when you ignore the people around you by looking at your phone instead. Other generations are guilty of this too, but not to the same extent. Ignoring the physical people in your life has serious consequences. Generation Z has become increasingly isolated from each other, preferring the dopamine highs of social media interactions over in-person conversations. They arrange hangouts less often and seek solitude more regularly. That itch to check social media has ironically built a wall between people despite its promise of bringing them together. Now sure, those on social media are connected to people in a way, but these connections are superficial and inadequate. A healthy mind and body require strong social bonds that can really only be obtained in person. Lacking quality social connections is comparable to smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. It can be devastating for your body. This is mainly because strong social relations reduce harmful levels of stress, which are bad for your mental and physical health. Strong social relationships benefit us in various ways. Both the act of caring and being cared for are known to release stress-reducing hormones. It's one of the benefits of being a parent and taking good care of a child. Friends can care for each other too. As people have fewer children, friendships will be increasingly important. Around the globe, fewer adults are having children. Countries are increasingly dropping below the replacement rate of 2.1 children per woman needed to maintain a consistent population. Not all members of Gen Z can realistically afford to have kids, and to have one kid you need an extra bedroom, which requires an enormous leap in rent or mortgage costs. There's also the extra expenses that come from raising a child. And to work, parents need daycare, which can cost a comparable amount to what they pay for rent. As the cost of living goes up, the feasibility of having children goes down. Undoubtedly, Gen Z adults are also asking themselves an important question: is this a world where I want to raise a child? The future feels very precarious. It's hard to imagine loving and caring for a being so much in the world that is falling apart at the seams. While it may be more difficult for Zoomers to have children, it's even more important to have quality connections with others. Relationships strengthen your sense of purpose while maintaining the support you need regularly. Social media offers an empty calorie version of a relationship. It only briefly gives you what you need. Gen Z has an addiction problem. Generational discourse is often filled with righteous blame and designed to shame for a sense of self-satisfaction. Other generations get to look down on others, feeling superior and smug. But when it comes to addiction, where does responsibility truly lay? Is it the individual who ought to abstain and get over their addiction regardless of the conditions, or do we all have a collective responsibility to help? The collective responsibility angle makes more sense if you're trying to create a bigger outcome for something as significant as an entire generation. Wagging our fingers at Gen Z isn't going to do much good. It might even cause greater stress, which leads to more addictive behavior. When it comes to youth addiction, it was and still is common to preach abstinence. In the 80s and 90s, youth programming used slogans such as "kids just say no to drugs." But this approach is quite limited. People use substances for a reason. Some want to gain or keep friends, but are struggling with emotional problems often related to stress and anxiety. Whatever the goal of the drug use is, people need healthy alternatives and they need healthy coping strategies. The broader picture for Gen Z is a story of unusual modern cruelty. They've been handed abysmal financial circumstances and an uncertain future, while simultaneously being given addictive technologies and greater access to substances. Society has induced stress with one hand and offered a harmful coping mechanism with the other. Gen Z has been put through the stress grinder and dropped like fresh meat into a pack of sharks. Innovative pushes for profit are engineering society in horrible ways, and Generation Z is an unfortunate test subject of this uncaring drive. It makes you wonder at what point the tech giants reckon with the consequences of their platforms and hardware. The sad truth may be that the only way they steer course is through extreme intervention. Profit-driven companies won't harm their revenue potential for the welfare of individuals. While they boast about their ethical decisions they've made as businesses, they're never at a serious cost to the bottom line. If anything, these virtue signals are just part of their marketing strategy to appeal to the ethics-minded consumer. Social media platforms often tell us that they're taking our concerns seriously, but that has yet to impact the basic function of their algorithms. They will do anything to keep you on their platforms longer so that you can view more ads and drive more revenue for them. Social media companies have made tweaks to try to reduce harmful content, such as conspiratorial videos. However, they haven't changed the algorithm to avoid enticing videos that keep viewers glued to the screen, which always seems to have negative consequences as a result. High-retention editing on social media messes with our ability to focus. The method of editing gets us hooked on a rapid stream of dopamine hits from highly stimulating content. Short-form videos enable us to receive information in very small doses, lowering our attention span. And for the doom scrollers, their stress is heightened as they can't look away from the horror. Our social media addiction isn't as harmful as a substance like meth, obviously, but it's far more pervasive and normalized. When Gen Z was growing up, there was no roadmap for screen use. Gen Z is going through an addiction epidemic. Between the addictive technology that isolates them, the crushing cost of living, and the precarity of the world, their stress and anxiety have become overwhelming. Zoomers have sought out addictive substances and habits as a coping mechanism. So how do they find their way out of this epidemic? Society in general should take a hard look at how we allow addictive innovations to steamroll adolescence. It may be too late to avoid Gen Z's unfettered exposure to addictive tech, but future generations will benefit from a more critical approach to technology adoption. The most important intervention for Gen Z involves bringing back in-person relationships. Platforms like Facebook and TikTok have been a sorry substitute for actual social connections. Phobbing needs to be a trend in the rearview mirror, and it should be considered as rude as it truly is. The only reason people abide by it is because they quickly go to their phones to resolve the negative feelings they get from being ignored. Your phone isn't as important as the person in front of you, not for your well-being at least. Our interactions on social media aren't accurate representations of human connections. Our posts and images are highly curated. We create identity profiles online. We don't share our unfiltered humanity. The pictures we upload are staged to look ideal. The messages we post are designed to draw likes and shares. We play the algorithm, which often involves being hostile with our words, where we would be more considerate talking directly to someone or a group. We share exciting hot takes so that people with similar values will like them. It doesn't matter if what was posted pushes others further away. It's all very stressful and unreal, and it's breaking us, especially Gen Z. We get a lot from our real interactions, and most importantly, we lower our stress, whereas social media interactions do the opposite. Gen Z isn't unique for being on social media too much. every generation old enough to partake, is engaging in phubbing and other poor behavior related to the online world. Who among us hasn't sat on a couch after a family meal while the grandparents stare at their iPads instead of their grandkids? But Gen Z is suffering the most because of this technology, and statistically, they're more hooked than other generations. They even spend far more time on social media than watching TV in terms of media consumption. There's positive signs for this generation, however. They commonly embrace a philosophy of caring for oneself that entails eating better, exercising, and trying to look after one's mental health. One benefit of this is that they're drinking less alcohol. It's also possible that they're drinking less because alcohol is more of a social drug. It's sitting alone on your phone with a drink just isn't that great of a time. Regardless, they have good instincts toward living healthier. They just need to set their eyes firmly on priority number one, the scourge of social media. Giving up an addiction can be especially challenging when the future seems so fraught. And there's no denying that the future looks grim for some, but you don't have to settle on this doomed outlook. Your efforts towards making a better future will bear fruit. There are still plenty of important things that are in your control, including your well-being. And no matter what happens, that's worth pursuing. So for those struggling with addiction, getting professional help is the most important first step above taking advice from a video essay. The suggestions in this video are based on research from medical professionals, but there is no substitute for working closely with an expert in your time of need.